Greetings, traveller. Here in the silence of this library, I uncover the most fascinating stories that have long been forgotten. Stay a while and listen, and I shall take you on a journey that has endured for centuries. Stories from Old World. Chapter 3. Blood and Bread. Morning came iron grey and tight-lipped, and the Red Pike Company met it with the bone-deep calm of men who had learned to keep their hands moving so their thoughts didn't shake loose. The Talabec breathed its brown breath to the south. The pines stitched a dark hem along the horizon. Crows measured the cold with their voices. They still called him Tallow, but the word had changed shape. It carried a nod now, a space in a line, a quarter turn of the head when orders came, as if the company had discovered a gear in itself that turned smoother when he stood near. He hid the black ghost veins beneath new bandages and kept the cord on his wrist tight enough to bite. The ledger's notches crowded, but the purges were working, visibly. After each cold immersion and ash binding, the branching stains faded from midnight to smoke. The nosebleeds stopped. The ringing in his ears fell from hammer to spoon. The whispers that had begun to collect in the corners of his thoughts. The wordless pressure urging him to take and spend. Thinned to a mood he could ignore. He stacked missions with pauses between them. He cleansed without fail. He told himself the math was holding. He told himself 7, and he meant it. The first fight of the week came like a barroom shove at the timberline, rough and eager. Ungors in a dozen, gores in pairs. A Brasherman bristling with fetishes and disease poems daubed on his chest. Crossbows sang, pikes spoke. A dozen heartbeats turned sloppy. Tallow tapped once, shallow as the first wave hit. The file around him tightened and cut clean, tireless and cold-eyed for 30 heartbeats. The push broke shoulders and moral both. When the Brasherman lifted a bone-twined staff and belched a curse that made teeth ache, Tallow reached again, deeper, exactly once. Gert's thrust took the shaman below the sternum and lifted him like a puppet. The force drove staff and organ and body back into a sapling, pinning him there like a pinned moth. The curse broke with a noise like wet parchment torn slowly. Ungors shrieked and fled. "Hold!" Ketson barked, already scanning for the next mistake to fix. He glanced at Tallow's hands, at the neat bandage, at the absence of fresh blood on his lip, and gave the smallest nod a man can give without angering the gods. They made the weeping oaks by noon to relieve a Talabheim levy that had been gnawed thin. The levy boys, faces too open for the forest, tried not to stare at the Red Pike. They failed and stared anyway. "Is it true you make men strong?" one whispered to Otto, who puffed up like a cockerel and then deflated sheepishly when he caught Tallow's eye. "Breath and bread," Tallow said, because Albrecht's words did not hurt to borrow. "And standing your ground when you want to run." They took their post along the low ditch and used the hours to drill the levee into shapes that wouldn't die immediately. Tallow walked the line quietly, laying fingers on wrists and shoulders, trading 7 counts with boys who didn't yet know how to put their fear down, somewhere it wouldn't be stolen. When the dusk push came, a gore knot testing the ditch, horns frothed, the levee did not break. They held with the kind of stubbornness that is respect's seed. Tallow tapped once, shallow, to put iron in a handful of spines. It was enough. That night, purging, stream cold as iron filings, breath litanies in a square until numbers pushed out noise, ash crosslines on his forearms, the wire brush until pain reminded him his skin was still his. The black veins receded. He counted his ledger, down 3, up 2. He could afford the week, if command didn't compress it. The next days swung wide and hard. A rescue push to extract a gun crew trapped in a half-wrecked watchtower, beastmen battering the broken stair, men on the landing shouting prayers and jokes too loud to be truly brave. Tallow tapped twice, staggered, once to turn the Red Pike wedge into unstoppable iron up the stairs, once to steady the crumbling landing while ropes hauled the last cannoner across the gap. A gauze cleaver met Tallow's shield, and the shock ran through him into the beast. Its wrists shattered without the blade travelling through, bones snapping with 2 clean pops. It fell backward in animal terror at its own hands. The crew stumbled out, weeping with laughter, clapping Tallow's shoulder harder than the armour could comfortably take. Bread, Albrecht insisted after, slapping a heel into Tallow's hand, eyeing the fading veins. I know you sit in that damned water. Sit shorter. 2 notches back tonight, Tallow promised, half smiling through chattering teeth. 3, Albrecht said, the sort of gentle command a father uses on a son he refuses to name. They harried a marauder column the next dawn, striking like a scythe and disappearing into pines before the iron could turn. Tallow learned to feather the taps, half pause, precise and stingy, timed with Quetzal's stave and drum voice, 30 heartbeats of inhuman cadence to punch a gap, stop, breathe, 7 in, hold, 7 out, then again to turn route into slaughter. Men moved as if along a drawn line only they could see. The Red Pike rewrote a section of road with speed and quiet. The story grew teeth. Respect followed in ridiculous forms. A Talabec boy brought Tallow roasted turnips as tribute, the only coin he had. A one-eared veteran silently handed him a better whetstone. Gert started calling him Tallow, like an old friend, instead of mouse, like a comfortable insult. Even Quetzal's voice changed. Less bark, more iron. Witch Hunter Capel did not praise, but she did not press him to the wall again. She watched. She wrote in the air. Once she said, "Do not trust easy victories." And he heard a stowed blessing hidden in the scold. He learned other tricks. How to stack a shallow tap with a shallow to mimic a deep without paying the full cost. 2 nimble cuts instead of 1 cleave. How to aim the cadence through his shield, touching it to a man's shoulder to send the lion to his legs rather than his fists, so the wedge ran instead of hacked. How to withhold the boon from a man already drunk on his own power, because tipping him would turn him into a butcher without aim. He managed. He learned. He believed the ledger answered to him. The purges kept working. After each day's heat, the rituals lifted the worst of it. The veins faded. The bleeding stopped. The whispers sank to a mutter. Once, only once, he woke to blood crusted in his ear and a dried smile under his nose. He sprinted to the stream before anyone saw, sat until his skin turned mottled marble, and crawled out with the drum sulking and his count back to 7, not 8. He laughed wetly to himself and whispered, "You don't get to choose the number," and felt foolish for talking to river water and relieved when the water didn't answer. stories moved faster than orders. Men at hearths in way hamlets said, "A levy pike split a bestigor from collar to hip and knocked 2 ungors standing behind it flat with the wind of it. A boy with a broken leg stood up and ran 30 paces and fell again, laughing as if the pain had been given a leash. A crossbow bolt nailed 3 marauders to a gate like a warning nailed to a door. Priests frowned, soldiers grinned, carpenters nodded and kept planing because wood doesn't care who wins." Tallow began to hear his name without wincing, sometimes his own. More often, the nickname turned different. "Tallow's wedge," men said, as if it were a tool they could borrow. "Get Tallow to look at your hand. He'll make it stop shaking. Wait for Tallow's breath and go." In quieter moments, with the ledger tighter, he sat with Albrecht and shared black bread and broth, so thin it didn't know it was soup. Albrecht asked about his dreams, without asking about his sins. "Bread dreams?" the priest would say, eyes amused and tired. "Cold water," Tallow would reply, and their smiles said everything they refused to. Marta Kappel intercepted him one evening as he left the stream, hair dripping, veins faint, count steady. "You look less like a crime than last week," she observed. "New barber," he offered. Her mouth may have twitched. "Do not let them make a saint of you. Saints end up the patron of something stupid. What would I patronize? Pride," she said dryly. "Or poor math." Then, after a beat, "You hold the count at 7. He paused. "Yes." She tapped the brim of her hat and left him with the annoying feeling that he had been both scolded and blessed. The week's crown came hard and clean, an assault on a fortified raider camp at the lip of a ravine. Palisades lashed with rawhide, banners of horn and hide crackling in the wind. Cannon had softened it, but not cracked it. The Red Pike and 2 levy line went in under a squall of arrows, mud to their shins, death doing arithmetic in every gap. Ketson's stave rose and fell, a metronome men had learned to love. "Wedge on me, Tallow, on the hinge." Tallow pressed palm to leather, once shallow, to get them to the wall, again shallow, to get them up it, once deep, to break the gate and the will behind it. For 30 heartbeats, the Red Pike became a song someone had written for them in a kinder world. Steel rang like a choir. A bestigor rose from the press like a murderer from his pride. Gert's pike went through him like a rumour through a drunk. The force folded the beast in half, over the haft, and flung the bending body into a crush of ungors that went down like swept reeds. A raider with a tower shield met Tallow's short sword. The parry held, but the bone and tendon in the raider's shoulder didn't. The arm tore away raggedly. The shield fell with it, and the man stared at the stump as if introduced to an impolite secret before he drowned in mud and blood. The wedge hit the central idol, a pillar of bones around a trunk, with a crack that would have been lightning if the sky had owned it. The idol fell. The raiders broke. Someone shouted, "Tallow!" the way men cry, "Fire!" And he wanted to bark that he wasn't a rallying word. But the heat faded and the wedge held without him, which was better. After, they stood tall because sitting would have turned men into puddles. Albrecht moved like a man twice his years and half his weight, pressing bread into mouths and prayer into chests, binding wounds with that blunt tenderness only truly tired men can manage. Ketson allowed himself one long exhale that sounded like revenge poured into a cup too small for it. Witch Hunter Capel walked the fallen, kicked idols into slag, and chalked over a little circle of odd cuts near the rear of the camp, a pattern that made Tallow's eyes itch. "Not here," she murmured. "Not this one." In the evening, the yard at Rauchstein grew loud. The good loud, the ugly loud, the relieved loud. Stories were told quicker than truth could catch them. Otto made faces to hide the way his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Gert tried to dance and failed and claimed the ground was a liar. Ketson broke up 3 fights before they began by glaring as if he could nail men to their better selves with a look. Tallow drifted at the edge of the firelight, bowl in hand, ears ringing with normal human noise for once. The ledger at his wrist sat easy. Down 1, cleansed 3. He could breathe all the way to the bottom of his lungs without the drum knocking. He smiled at nothing, which is the best kind. "Sit," Albrecht said, pulling him into the circle as if he weighed bread. "Eat. Listen to fools. It will remind you to live." He ate. He listened. He lived. When the camp quieted into hiccups and snores, he slipped to the stream because habit is a tyranny and, for now, a friend. The water took the day's heat and made it steam under the cold sky. He breathed. 7 in, hold, 7 out. He expected the twitch at the edge of the count, the number with too many corners. It didn't come. He smiled into the dark and let his jaw unclench. The black veins faded to pale suggestions. The whispers, if they had been there, were already drowned by the water sounded like home. He climbed out, numb and good and full of bread. He dried his arms and half laughed, half shivered at a thought that visited and left no mess. Perhaps he had won. Not forever, just enough. At dawn, command sent them to sweep chalk circles along the Maiden's Ford. Small petty cult work, more nuisance than threat. The Red Pike went like men being asked to fix a fence. Tallow touched each circle with his boot and felt nothing much. Chalk and hope. He ground them with his heel. He made a joke. Men laughed. Marta Capel did not. She watched the river and the tree line. When she spoke, no one heard her over the wind. She said, "Not here." They were walking back when the sky cracked, not with thunder, but with a low drum taking up a march far to the north. It rolled over the pines like a rumour with weight. Men stopped and looked up as if that could help. The drum fell silent again, as if embarrassed to have spoken. The yard took the sound and made it into talk. Powder was counted twice. Pikes were oiled as if oil could make wood brave. Albrecht's hands shook only when he poured wine. Marta Capel stared into the west and did not blink. Ketson sharpened his stave on nothing and called it busy. Tallow ate bread and counted each chew to keep his mouth from saying that the number in his breath had stayed at 7 all day. When night fell, he did not go to the stream. He lay on his pallet among the Red Pike and listened to Otto snore and Gert mutter and Ketson grind his teeth in time with the little drum under everything. He smiled because the snore was stupid and good. The runner came at third watch, mud to his ribs, eyes wide. "Barrow," he blurted to the captain, to everyone. North by east, circle, chanting, beastmen, cultists. The air's wrong. They're opening something. The yard sobered in a single breath. Captain Hartman looked 10 years uglier in the torchlight. Witch Hunter Capel's jaw flexed once and settled. Father Albrecht shut his book with a noise like gossip stopping. Best. Now. Hartman said simply. Quetzal's gaze found Tallow in the lines forming in the dark. He tapped the stave against his shoulder once. Stand where you can see. Bread first, Albrecht whispered, thrusting a heel into Tallow's hand as if it were a relic. Tallow ate it in 2 bites and felt absurdly blessed. He pressed his thumb to the leather cord at his wrist. The notches crowded. The purges had worked. He could afford 1 deep, 2 shallow, if he was careful, if the count held. 7 in, hold, 7 out. The Red Pike slipped into the trees, iron quiet. Men turned to their best selves by need and habit. The pines received them like debt. The drum, far off, began again, not loud, but sure, like boots on old wood. Like a promise that had found the right ears. Respect walked with them in the dark, earned, worn, heavy, and warm. Tallow smiled once, brief, because he had a place in the line and the line knew it. Then he stopped smiling because the trees went thin and a clearing opened and the barrow crouched like a buried fist under a skin of earth. And a circle of chalk and bone and men and worse things made a white scar around its mouth. He swallowed iron in his tongue. He lifted his shield. He found his breath. 7, always 7, he hoped. He lied. He did both like prayer. Chapter 4. The Inversion. The barrow crouched in the clearing like a knuckle under skin, ringed by stones that sheep would not pass and beetles adored. Between those stones, chalk cuts stitched a circle, bones wired along the line, guttering tallow candles stuck in skulls, crooked sigils that made the eye itch if it looked too long. Beastmen held the compass points in 4s, steaming in the cold. Red-ragged cultists swayed and chanted with knives held wrong. The Red Pike Company flattened into the dark along the tree line. Iron quiet, breath like smoke. Quetzal's stave lifted, fell, counting men into place. Father Albrecht stood at the hinge with his hammer low and his mouth already shaping breadwords. Witch Hunter Capel, eyes slate, hat brim shedding dew, drew a small circle in dust by the roots and put her boot just outside it. Tallow felt the drum very far away, then not far. He checked the leather cord at his wrist out of habit, felt the bite, the crowding of notches, and forced his breath into its shape. 7 in, hold, 7 out. Now, Quetzal breathed, and the line rose. Crossbows sang, pikes spoke. Red Pike hit the ring like a door slamming. The first rank of cultists went down without finishing their sentence. Gors bellowed and waded in. Ungors squealed and scattered. Albrecht's hammer fell, and a skull answered like a bell. Capel's pistol cracked, and a red-sashed throat closed forever. Tallow tapped once, shallow, to carry the wedge to the chalk. The men around him sharpened in an exhale. For 30 heartbeats, the file moved as if a single thought had found their feet. A Gor charged and met Tallow's short sword. The parry tore howling meat from bone, arm, shoulder, pride. Gert drove a pike through a Bray shaman's chest and into an idol post. The shock pinned the shaman there, howling until his voice found the end of itself. Break the line! Quetzal roared over the clash. Crack the chalk! Tallow put his boot on the chalk and ground it, scattering powder. The circle shivered but did not fail. He felt, not with his hand, but with the part of him that had learned to listen to the wrong things, that the chalk was scaffolding, not load-bearing. The load came from below. "Not here!" Capel shouted without looking at him, her voice cutting through iron and fear. "The work's not the ring, it's the mouth." The barrow's low door, half-buried stones and earth, hummed like a struck drumskin. The chanting wasn't words anymore. It was cadence. It was number, not 7, 8. Tallow's stomach clenched. He dragged his breath back by the scruff. 7. Always 7. The press turned ugly. Beastmen piled. Knives flashed. The wedge bent. Tallow tapped shallow, then shallow again. A careful stack he'd trained into himself. The file surged and steadied. A levy boy who should have died took a cleave on his shield and cut a gore's knee out. A pikeman shook blood from his eyes and laughed without meaning to. 30 heartbeats, and the heat sank. Then the barrow door sighed. The ground under Tallow's boots vibrated, a low purr in the bones. The chalk sigils brightened like memories of fire. The cultists' knives came down together, not into men, but into their own palms, into bowls of black sand and old fat. The air turned coppery. The chant fell into a locked step. 8. Tallow felt it slip into his breath like a thief into a house that had been left unbolted too often. His next inhale struck 8 and held there like a gear he couldn't pull free. He forced 7. It dragged back to 8 with a smile. "Hold the hinge!" Ketson, far then near, stave hammering in time with a drum he could not hear. "Red Pike, hold!" For a heartbeat, a long one, stretched on a rack. Tallow hesitated. He could hold the wedge with what he had left if he poured carefully. He could save Gert, Otto, the boys from Talabheim at the ditch. He could give them 30 heartbeats of godlike speed and hands that never trembled. And then he would sit in the stream until ice turned him into a saint. He could. He had. He pressed his palm to the cracked leather inside his shield and pulled. Heat leapt up his arm like a forge door opening. The drum behind his ribs punched to 8 in triumph. His vision licked red at the edges. He fed the wedge. A deep pour, then another when a gap opened where a boy had been. Then another when a gore's horn took a man clean through and the line stuttered. Men around him changed. Gert's pike hit a bestigore and split it from collar to gut, momentum hurling the halves into a chaos of ungores behind. A levy with a split brow surged upright with a howl, blood washing his face. He swung his broken half like a maul and snapped a gore's neck with the crack of green wood. A thrown javelin zipped like a bullet, took an Ungor's head clean off and thudded into an idol behind it with a cheerful, obscene clack. "Press!" Ketson bellowed, riding the wave. Tallow grinned without humour. He could do this. He could meter it. His ledger whispered, 2 deep, 1 shallow, cleanse triple, water, ash, lash. He'd done worse. The barrow breathed again, not air. Number, 8, 8, 8, 8. Brass points scratching the world. The cultists' chant fell silent. Their mouths hung open, smiles carved by a poor sculptor. The chalk went out like empty candles. The ring had done its work. It had called the one who carried the count inside him. "Not a gate," Capel hissed, eyes cutting to Tallow. flint sparking flint. A law. He knew in the marrow that had gone warm. The ritual hadn't needed him to arrive. It had expected him, baited him, built to the number that had been tugging his breath off its hinge for a week. He had come anyway, proud and careful and certain. His next breath went to 8 without asking. The heat behind his eyes became a glare. His palm burned under the bandage as if a rune had been pressed there. Black veins raveled up his forearms in an instant, branching like leafless trees. His ears rang until sound turned into a single note. Blood trickled from his nostril, lip, ear. Mouse! Ketson, close now, stave jamming a gore back, eyes old and precise. Look at me. Tallow tried. The world squinted around the edges. A shape stood just behind his own, tall and lean and hungry, sword for a hand, brass under skin. It smiled not with a mouth, but with a blade. No, not a gate. A taking. He forced the tap closed. He pulled his hand from the shield, held it up, palm bloody and shaking, as if he could show his body a stop sign. The wedge wavered as the boon faltered. A gore pushed through and roared. Tallow slammed his shield into its throat with more force than his weight could account for and felt the ring in him laugh. Instinct overrule. Desire overcount. The drum stomped. 8. He reached, no choice, no time, and the boon came shaped wrong. Men around him surged too far. One bellowed in inhuman joy and swung too wide, cleaving an ally's forearm as easily as a cord. Another's veins lit with red fire. His chest hitched and didn't catch. He fell gasping like a fish, eyes bulging. The boy from Talabec reeled as muscles seized, dropped his spear, clawed at his throat. No, Tallow said aloud, uselessly. He yanked the boon back, panicked, forced it narrow to 2 men, Gert and Otto, just enough to let them live this minute. It worked. It cost. The heat in him flared bright white. Pain turned clean, and then vanished into a pleasure that was shaped like falling. The barrow door tore. Not open, no wind, no light. Torn like a page from an old book. The old bones under the hill turned in their dirt to listen. The 8-point smile tore wide. A palm on his shoulder. Albrecht, face drawn, eyes gentle even now. Bread, the priest said, as if naming it could remake the world. Breathe, son. 7 in. 8. Hold, Ketson said at his other side, stave braced, voice a low nail in timber. Hold, on me, on 7. He tried. He truly did. He grasped for the cold taste of stream water and ash and rope bite and breath in a square. He tugged at the ledger on his wrist as if a knot could pull him back into himself. His mouth filled with copper. His skin went hot. The shape behind him stepped closer, stepped through. He saw the moment Capel understood. The witch hunter's eyes thinned, not in scorn, in sorrow. Back, she shouted to the line, savage and clear. Back from him! The boon bucked and bit. It flooded where he didn't want it, hit men he'd have spared, missed men who needed it. It surged to 8 like water seeking a fall. It snapped his control like a dry twig, and then laughed that it was ever there. He fell to one knee, not from weakness, from a hand, an unseen one, pushing his shoulders down so his bones made a better frame. The black veins climbed past elbow to bicep, to shoulder, to neck. His teeth ached, as if his jaw were a handle. His eyes watered red. The first claw came through his fingers. He tried to open his hand. The hand that was now a blade opened into a smile. Brass pushed under his skin like a truth finally told. His face lengthened in the reflection of a torn shield boss. His mouth sharpened. His tongue tasted iron and oil. Gert stared, cursing, then pleading in the same breath. "Mouse! Tallow! Stop! Tallow's voice came thin, a strip between brass and blood. He forced each word out like a nail between teeth. "So sorry." He moved. The thing in him, no, the thing that was now him, stepped into the line like a song that had been waiting for musicians. Ketzen's stave cracked across the blade hand, made a dent that smoked and healed. Ketzen drove in anyway, eyes alight with that particular courage men invent when the sensible thing is to run. He hooked, shoved, tried to turn the killing somewhere that wasn't his children. Tallow swung low, then high. The stave met the cut, splintered. The follow-through sketched a red grin across Ketzen's belly. The sergeant did not look down. He shoved Tallow back with the last of his strength, as if moving a sun from a burning doorway. "Breathe," he said again, too soft for war. He slid to his knees and sat as if the world had decided to be gentle with him for a single second. "I'm sorry," Tallow said to him, to Albrecht, to Otto. Otto rushed him, sobbing, blade up. Tallow parried without meaning to, then did, then cut as the blade asked. Otto folded, eyes shocked at how fast sorrow can arrive. Albrecht struck from the side, breadwords in his mouth like stones. The hammer hit brass and sang wrong. He took a slice across the hip and fell with a prayer someone else might finish. Kappel fired point blank. The ball punched through a red glare and came out the other side, burning. She stepped into the chalk she'd drawn at the roots and set her jaw. "Back!" she screamed, iron and command. "Back from him! The circle eats your courage." The line reeled away. Those who could. Some stayed, baffled by fear turned sudden, by the way their own hands shook, by the drum of 8 that made men eager to die and too clumsy to live. Gert planted himself in front of the levy boys, like a stump in a flood. Pike broken, shield canted, mouth full of bad words he'd never get to finish. He took 3 steps of the thing's dance into his chest, then none. The cultists, wide-eyed, began to fall to their knees in rapture. This was not what they had asked for, but it was close enough. A beastman howled approval, then reconsidered when Tallow's blade hand parted it from its idea of tomorrow. The barrow did not open further. The circle did nothing more. The trap had sprung not to call something through, but to rip open what had been led there. They had hunted a gate. They had found a mirror. Tallow watched it all from a sliver inside himself, pressed between ribs and regret. He could speak only when the thing was amused, so he spoke in the smallest spaces, the syllables between strikes. "I'm sorry," to Gert's blood. "I'm sorry," to Otto at his feet. "I'm sorry," to Albrecht, who met his eyes and tried to smile the corner smile Ketzen would have liked. "Don't be," Albrecht breathed, which was madness and mercy in one. "Be bred, if you can." The thing laughed and raised the blade. "Down!" Kappel roared. She hurled a black iron sigil into the dirt. It hissed, spat, died. "Fall back to the ditch! Powder! Up!" Captain Hartmann's cannon spoke from the trees. 1, 2, 3 punches that made the barrow flinch and the ground jump. Shot plowed mud, shattered stones, burst candles. The glare around Tallow guttered, then flared brighter, feeding on panic and pain and the number 8 itself. He could feel it. Greedy, childish, delighted. A butcher's god had found a toy. The Red Pike did not break. They curled back around their wound as good soldiers do, made a ring with a gap where a heart used to be. They pulled bodies with them as far as they could. Quetzal, heavy with work. Albrecht, heavier with love. Otto, light as he had always been. Tallow staggered after them, a smile drawn under his skin with a blade, unable to choose where his feet landed. He reached for one more apology and found the thing already forming it into a laugh. Capel placed her chortle at the ditch, drew clean, fast, furious circles that had never saved her from anything but practice. "Hold the line," she hissed to Hartman, without taking her eyes from Tallow. "He wants the gap. Don't give him a story he can end." Hartman's jaw worked. He looked at the men he had, at the hole where others had been, at the thing wearing the mouth that had been their salvation all month. "Fire again," he told the cannon as if it were prayer. Powder thundered. Smoke swallowed the clearing. The barrow's mouth coughed dust and bone and stopped singing 8 for a breath that wasn't mercy. Tallow stopped with it, head cocked, blade lowered in puzzlement that wasn't his. "Now," Capel whispered to the men without moving her mouth. "If you're going to run, do it smart." They didn't run. They moved. They dragged. They carried. They covered. They lied to themselves in clever soldier ways. They made the distance between ditch and tree line into a road long enough to take them out of a story they could not survive. Tallow did not follow. The thing had found new toys. The candles guttering in mud. The chalk cut and crushed. The bones wired. It played like a child might, arranging them into a number that looked like a door. It did not need men to make its game mean something. It had Tallow, and Tallow had enough left to understand he had become a knife someone else was sharpening. In the smoke, he turned to the barrow and raised the blade to the sky. The red glare around him faded to a soft glow, then pulsed with his breath. He tried to turn his head and find Capel for one more look from someone who had always added correctly. He couldn't. He closed his eyes and found the stream, cold and kind, under his skin. He heard Albrecht's voice say bread without moving a mouth. He heard Quetzal's stave counting 7s even as the world insisted on 8. The Red Pike did not cheer that night. They held a ditch and cried like men who had run out of better ideas. Capel chalked circles until her fingers bled and the chalk did too. Hartman posted sentries and gave them orders he didn't believe. The cannon watched the trees with blind metal eyes. At dawn, the clearing was a raw tooth in a mouth of pines. The barrow crouched as before. The chalk was a smear. The bones are in new places. At the center, a figure stood, lean, wrong, red, where there should be shadow. Now and then it raised a blade and traced a slow, patient 8 in the air, like a teacher with all the time in the world. Tallow was inside it, a man pressed between a number and a hunger. In the thin spaces, when the thing paused to savor, he found enough to whisper into the cold. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it to the pines and the ditch and the names on his tongue. Sometimes, when the wind came right, the men at the ditch heard a human voice under the butcher's laugh, saying those two words with such sincerity that some of them forgave him in advance for what he would do next. Witch Hunter Capel did not forgive. She is not paid to. But she set her jaw around the truth like a nail and nodded once to the shape in the clearing, a respect paid to an enemy that had once been a man who had tried to count correctly. 7, she said under her breath, and wrote it once in the dirt for luck. Then she erased it with her boot and began the work of building a wall between a city and a story. Far to the south, in taverns and way shrines, men began to tell a new tale in low, careful voices. Of the Red Pike, of the boy called Tallow who poured breath into other men, of the week when bread held, of the night when numbers changed, of a barrow where a bloodletter paced and sometimes paused and whispered apologies between laughs. They did not end it because no one knew the ending yet. They only counted to 7, stubbornly, and when a drum tried to teach them 8, they spat and made their mouths taste like bread again. The story has come to an end. Our hearth still burns. Stay, warm yourself, and let sleep take you as the world drifts into silence.